coming on the air with police in Philadelphia trying to stop the chaos, the violence, the theft in that city, shutting down liquor stores today, we're just learning, and making dozens of arrests after a basically mass looting spree hitting stores all across the city. The latest in a wave of crime affecting cities across the country. So what can be done? We're live in Philly, and we're also live in Baltimore, where there's a desperate search there for the man accused of killing a 26-year-old tech CEO inside her apartment building. What the suspect's mother is telling NBC News exclusively in just a minute. Plus, the top Senate Democrat is finally talking about the indicted senator's future. That's Chuck Schumer talking Bob Menendez after a not guilty plea today by Menendez in federal court. What Senator Schumer is and is not saying ahead of a potentially crucial meeting tomorrow. Plus, a well-known black rock guitarist in a stunning mix-up, an airline employee claiming he kidnapped and trafficked his own biracial children. Why he says this never should have happened and could have easily been stopped. Then the Swift effect is still swifting, and it seems like everybody's cashing in. Why what Taylor Swift touches seems to turn to gold, or in this case, red and gold. We're breaking down the numbers on what is not a love story necessarily, but a business story, coming up in just a minute. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and the mother of the suspect wanted for the murder of a young tech CEO late today exclusively telling our team she wants her son to turn himself in because she's worried that police, and I'm quoting her here, will kill him. Police are looking for Jason Billingsley, who they're now connecting to another attempted murder, arson, and rape just last week. We know that Billingsley got out of prison early, less than a year ago, after only serving 9 of a 30-year sentence for a first-degree sex offense. But we still don't know for sure why Billingsley got out so early. The mayor of Baltimore, however, says he should never have been released. I want to bring in Ron Allen in Baltimore. And Ron, we're looking ahead to a vigil in just over an hour for this young tech CEO, Pavel Lapierre, who was killed apparently in her apartment here. Tell us more about what we're learning about her and about this memorial service that is meant to remember her. She had an impact, even at her young age, in this city.
She did, and her friends and family, colleagues say that she loved the city and that she gave a lot to the city, and that was striking about her work. The tech firm that she co-founded with another colleague, it was all about providing information to other startups, helping people get their businesses running. And later tonight, we expect to see a vigil here in the heart of Baltimore, her friends and colleagues gathering here to pay tribute to her. We spoke to a man named Sherrod Davis, who was a co-founder of her company that got started here. Here's some of what he had to say about the emotion that he was feeling and about the tragicness of her death. Take a listen to what he had to say.
She wore her heart and her values on her sleeve, and she never had an emotion that she could hide. She was just wise beyond her years. She could see things that no one else could see. Honestly, I think of her as like a superhero in that way.
So, yes, a very emotional gathering here we're expecting in Baltimore just a little later this evening as friends, colleagues come and pay tribute to this woman who, everything we hear about her, they think she was extraordinary and very special.
What is the latest then on this search for Billingsley, the suspect accused here in her death, and these other cases that he may be connected to?
Right. Well, tonight, police are offering a $6,000 reward. That's something new to try and get more information. They are connecting him to this case, this arson robbery case that happened last week, September 19th, nearby in another part of Baltimore. And the police are also saying that they're going to look back over all their cases over the past year to see if there are other cases that he is connected to, allegedly. So there's all of that as the intensity, the manhunt continues to step up. Hallie?
Ron, can you give us a sense of what it's been like to be there in Baltimore, in that community, and given this moment that is getting, of course, so much attention, this sort of national spotlight here on the city?
Well, this happened in a gentrifying neighborhood not far from the heart of downtown, not far from the Inner Harbor part of Baltimore that many people will know well. So it seems like it was a very random place is the point. It's not a very high traffic area. It's not a place that's a very high crime area, as I understand it. There seems to be no connection between Lapierre and this alleged suspect. So people are on edge. People we talk to in that area are wondering why this happened here. It seems like a very random attack and a very vicious attack from what we understand. And now we are hearing more more details about this suspect, about other crimes that he is allegedly connected to that are also very violent. So there's a lot of concern and a lot of wonder why this is happening here now, and of course a lot of hope that the police can solve this case and bring their suspect into custody.
Ron Allen, live for us there in Baltimore. Thank you. To Philadelphia now with new details from that city about what you're about to see. A chaotic scene. Police tackling crowds of people with others running through the streets and running out of stores. Look at this, with stuff that they stole. We are now learning tonight that all the liquor stores in the city, all the liquor stores in Philly city limits are closing today, after 18 of them had their stores robbed and damaged during this violence. You can see broken windows, smashed bottles outside. And look here, this is some more video recorded from this whole thing. You can see a bunch of people running out of an Apple store with what looks to be stuff from inside, phones, products, etc. Police say the crowd targeted other businesses, a Lululemon, for example, the athleisure wear store, a Foot Locker, too. They say they recovered a couple of guns with suspects rounded up. The DA's office says 49 adults and 3 minors have been arrested so far. They're still being processed. Police also say we shouldn't even be calling this looting, that this is burglary and theft. It is one of the snapshots here tonight of crime in America. Look at Oakland, where business owners have been on strike this week, demanding to talk to the governor about protecting their stores on the heels of some high-profile break-ins in cities like Baltimore, in San Francisco, in Seattle, and New York. Some of these retailers are responding. Target, for example, as we first told you 24 hours ago on this show, is planning to shut down 9 of its stores across the country, citing in part, they say, violence and robberies, the inability to keep their customers and workers safe. I want to bring in Rahima Illis now, who is joining us live from Philly. So, Rahima, this looting happened after a day when protests were happening around the city, but police say those unrelated protests were not connected with the theft that we saw later on. What happens next from here with liquor stores shutting down and so much attention on this?
Well, one of the things that they're going to be doing, and like the Apple store behind me, where you see that their windows are covered because the store is closed as they try to assess the damage as iPads and iPhones were taken from the store. They've got to put their store back together. The same is true of the Lululemon store, which is just a couple of blocks from here. They had mannequins that were toppled over this morning when we looked in the window of the store, and there were clothes strewn all around the floor. They are assessing their damage, and authorities want to get a full account of how much of their property was destroyed. And they're going to continue, they say, to look for people who were responsible for this crime. As you point out, we had some 49 people, adults, who were charged with burglary and theft, some 3 juveniles who were charged. So this investigation is ongoing, Hallie. And what does it matter to the people here in the city of Philadelphia? Just listen to a woman, someone told us how they feel about this.
It feels like it's a little bit overwhelming in the sense it's like, what can they do? I mean, especially if it's like a flash mob or it's a larger incident, it feels like it's a little out of control.
I'm very cautious, but I'm not afraid.
That's what we heard over and over. People were feeling just unsettled. They're going to continue. As you see, the streets are filled with people getting on with their lives, but this has left them very unsettled, Hallie.
You know, we talked about this being sort of a moment here as we look at crime more broadly in this country and some of the other high-profile incidents we've seen. It seems like there are many cities, not just Philly, grappling with what to do here, right, as far as how to stop this, how to get a handle on this down the road, if you will.
Well, it may be one of those big challenges that authorities are facing because there was someone, an influencer who is known to her fans as Meatball. She has something like 200,000 followers on Instagram, some 400,000 TikTok fans. And according to authorities, she was streaming this incident live as it was unfolding last night. Authorities are concerned about whether or not was this influencer influencing people in a certain kind of behavior. That's not clear. This is part of the investigation that's going on. And it becomes a question of how do police that kind of behavior, Hallie?
Rahima Ellis, live for us there in Philadelphia. Rahima, thank you so much for that reporting. Let's take you back here to Washington now, because the top Senate Democrat is holding his fire, at least for now, not calling for one of his indicted Democratic colleagues, a sitting senator, to resign. Instead, Senator Chuck Schumer is looking ahead to a key meeting tomorrow, this very highly anticipated Senate Democrat lunch where Senator Bob Menendez is expected to speak to his colleagues for the first time since he was hit with new federal bribery charges. Listen.
Like you, I was just deeply disappointed, disturbed when I read the indictment. Look, I've known Senator Menendez a very long time, and it was truly, truly upsetting. Tomorrow, he will address the Democratic caucus, and we'll see what happens after that.
So a lot riding on those remarks, it sounds like, from Senator Menendez. It comes after the second highest ranking Democrat in that chamber, Dick Durbin, basically said that if Menendez's fellow New Jerseyans, Cory Booker and Governor Phil Murphy think that Menendez should go, then he should resign. That means nearly 2/3 of the Democratic caucus, a grand total of 30 senators, think Menendez should step down. This graphic we show you, it keeps getting bigger every single night. This is after Menendez and his wife, along with 2 of 3 other co-defendants, walked out of a New York federal court this morning after pleading not guilty, released under bonds, restrictions, etc. I want to bring in our team covering this. NBC's Tom Winter is outside that courthouse in New York. Sahil Kapoor is live for us at the Capitol. Tom, let me start with you. A bunch of guidelines here for Senator Menendez going forward. Talk us through that.
Right, and they're not very restrictive here, Hallie. Basically, it's a $100,000, what's called a PRB, a personal reconnaissance bond. The senator's travel is going to be restricted overseas for personal travel, so he has to hand over his personal passport, but his official passport, he doesn't have to hand that over. Senators have too, so his ability to go on congressional delegations, referred to in your town as CODELs for short, he's able to go on those. He can continue to do that and can continue to travel within the United States. A potentially big restriction for him, though, is his ability to contact witnesses, including those that might have been on his staff that may have knowledge or may ultimately testify if this case goes to trial. As you noted, Senator Menendez pleaded not guilty today, same with his wife, and as well as 2 other businessmen who've been charged, Hallie.
There's also this other piece of this, right? Because NBC is reporting tonight that there's a separate investigation by the FBI into whether or not the Egyptian intelligence services had anything to do with this alleged scheme. Explain why that would be something that would occur here and how Nadine Menendez, of course, the senator's wife, plays into this.
Right. So the reporting led by our colleague, Jonathan Dienst, focusing on this other component of the investigation. So there's the investigation involving Menendez, his wife, and 3 other businessmen. But they're also taking a look into what were the Egyptian intelligence services up to here? What were they trying to do and determine whether or not Nadine Menendez passed along information to those intelligence services, what roles her might be, but also is there a role to potentially charge Egyptian intelligence officials with trying to co-opt the senator through his wife. So I think that's going to be the key nexus here, is because of her prior knowledge and her prior established relationship with a New Jersey businessman who is Egyptian, and that individual's ties to Egyptian intelligence. That's kind of the pass-through here, Hallie, and that's the thing that they're going to be focused on in their counterintelligence investigation. Of course, we should note the senator's wife has not been charged with anything tied to counterintelligence, so right. We want to make sure that that's clear, but that investigation is definitely ongoing, Hallie.
Tom Winter live for us in New York. Thank you. Let's get to Sahil Kapoor, who's live here in Washington. And Sahil, in just the last hour, we saw Senator Schumer pass a resolution that takes Menendez out of the chairmanship of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Very powerful committee. It is a big deal. He'd been the head of that. It was expected that he'd get pulled from that. We knew that was coming. But I wonder how this indictment, how these charges affect the senator's ability to get access to key intelligence information that members of the Senate will often be privy to.
It's remarkable, Hallie. This is the second time that Bob Menendez has been forcibly stripped of his position as the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The last time was when he had that first indictment on corruption charges, which he escaped as a result of a hung jury. This time, unlike last time when he was the ranking member, he is the chairman of that committee. And once again, that position is going to be taken by the Democratic Senator Ben Cardin, at least for the foreseeable future, while he's fighting these charges. And one big question Democrats are going to have to face is, tomorrow, when Bob Menendez speaks to them at lunch, will it tip some of the remaining Democrats who have not called on him to resign in that direction? So far, there's 30 of them. You showed all their names and faces. senators who are calling on Menendez to resign. It's actually worse than that when you consider the fact that several of the Democrats who are staying silent say they're only doing so because they're on the ethics committee, and as a result, they're not, realistically able to comment on matters that could come before them. The Democrats calling on him to resign include leadership members like Dick Durbin, committee chairs like Patty Murray, red state Democrats like Sherrod Brown and John Tester, who are facing voters next year. It's a very broad section of the conference. Everyone agrees that Menendez deserves the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. What they don't agree on is whether he deserves to remain a senator while fighting these very serious charges.
And it feels like a lot, I don't want to overstate it, but a lot might be riding on this lunch tomorrow. We say lunch. This is something that happens. The senators meet on a regular basis. Just the Democrats, they'll get together. They're in a room. There's often leaks or reporting that comes out of it as senators talk to members of the media. And here, the highlight, the top of the agenda is going to be Senator Menendez, it seems, set to plead his case to his colleagues here, with Senator Chuck Schumer listening very carefully.
That's absolutely right, Hallie. Schumer has not called on Menendez to resign. He only went as far as that video clip you played there. He said he was disappointed and disturbed by the remarks, but it looks like he's going to wait at least until tomorrow to hear what Menendez has to say. Schumer in the past has been a lagging indicator of, what most of his conference thinks. The majority of them are already on that page. It seems like he wants to give this a little bit more time. The question becomes, if Chuck Schumer does want Menendez to go, if basically the entire Democratic conference decides that he shouldn't stick around and Menendez refuses to go willingly, what can they do about it? I think we can show a list of options about what the Senate could theoretically do here. There are several possibilities. One of them is they could strip him of other committee assignments. Yes, he's no longer the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but he does have other committee seats where he can vote and try to move legislation. He has a security clearance that other senators do, should someone who's been credibly accused of taking bribes in connection with foreign policy decisions to benefit the government of Egypt have that. There's also the question of censure, which would be symbolic, doesn't have the force of law. It would be just, I guess, a resolution of disapproval. And then, of course, expulsion, which would require 2/3 of the Senate, has not been done since the 1860s, since the Civil War, Hallie.
And to be clear, Sahel, just very quickly here so that people understand, it doesn't matter in a practical sense if Chuck Schumer calls on Senator Menendez to resign. And I mean, of course, that would be added political pressure. You could have every Democrat calling on Senator Menendez to resign. And short of an expulsion move, which you just laid out, Senator Menendez doesn't have to. He can still stay in office because he was elected to, right? Just to be clear.
Yes, that's exactly right. They can't force him to resign. They can simply make it untenable for him to stay in the Senate. If none of your colleagues have confidence in you, there's not a lot you can do.
Sahel Kapoor, thank you. Tonight, the Army private who intentionally ran into North Korea is back in U.S. custody. He is on his way to Texas, we've learned, for medical treatment, not long after North Korea says it expelled him. As this news was breaking, our Lester Holt was sitting down with the head of the Joint Chiefs, Chairman General Mark Milley. Listen.
The important thing, of course, is he's safe. We'll get him reunited with his family and bring him back to the United States.
So Travis King is set to arrive at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio sometime overnight for something they call reintegration. This is something that happens for example, hostages or prisoners of war. It helps them deal with, trauma, post-traumatic stress from what they've been through here. You probably remember Travis King's story. He bolted across that DMZ, the demilitarized zone that separates South Korea from North Korea, during a public tour of that area. U.S. officials say the North Koreans ended up bringing King to China, where he was turned over to the Swedes, who then turned him over to the U.S. military. Josh Letterman is joining us now. And just to explain why the Swedish officials got involved here, it's because the U.S. does not have diplomatic relations with North Korea. The question here is, why did North Korea now choose to expel Travis King? Do we know?
We don't know, Hallie, and neither, frankly, does the U.S. government. That is a question that U.S. officials are asking right now, because they also say very clearly that there were no concessions whatsoever given to North Korea in exchange for releasing Travis King. And in the past, when North Korea had taken Americans prisoner and then eventually released them, there was some type of trade for food assistance or sanctions relief, or at the minimum, a high-level visit that would bring positive attention to them. You probably remember Jimmy Carter visiting North Korea, the late Bill Richardson, to get Americans out. But in this case, the North Koreans essentially just said, all right, we'll let him leave. And that has created a lot of questions. The U.S. State Department spokesman Matt Miller today acknowledging, frankly, they don't know. Watch.
I would not want to speculate on any motivations on the North Korean side. I would not see this as the sign of some breakthrough. I think it's a one-off with them being willing to return this private.
But here's the other interesting thing, Hallie. There is a difference in tone from what we heard from the State Department there today and other U.S. officials. And, for example, last week when you and I were speaking and I was in Qatar after those Americans were released from Iran, and the U.S. was saying, we have nothing else to talk about with Iran right now. There's not really a situation for nuclear talks. We heard the U.S. government today saying they would love to have diplomacy with North Korea, that they hope, they're not optimistic, but that they hope that this could lead the way to some type of restored conversations with North Korea that could help address the nuclear concerns and other issues.
You're pulling on a very interesting thread here, because when you hear, for example, the State Department spokesperson say, well, this is not a breakthrough, it's a one-off, it raises the question of what is that diplomatic, what do those diplomatic conversations look like moving forward, not just with North Korea, Josh, but also, for example, with China.
Absolutely. And there's been a lot of attention paid today to what role China played in releasing Travis King. Now, we know that basically China was the buy station between North Korea and him being flown out through South Korea to the United States. The U.S. has actually thanked the Chinese government for allowing and facilitating that movement through their country. They had to bring State Department planes, for example, that don't normally land in China. But beyond that, the U.S. is saying, look, the Chinese didn't broker this. In fact, the North Koreans apparently didn't even want to speak directly to the American government about this. And that's why the U.S. had to work through the Swedish government as our protecting power in North Korea to deal with this. So there's clearly still a major reluctance by the North Koreans to engage directly with the U.S. government, even as they took this action today that the U.S. is very grateful for in releasing Travis King.
Josh Letterman, thank you very much. Lots to watch, lots of moving pieces there. Appreciate it. In just a couple hours tonight over in Michigan, we will see former President Donald Trump talk with striking auto workers, not on the picket lines, but at an assembly plant, a non-union assembly plant. That says this huge strike against those big three car companies could get bigger in just 48 hours, with the union president announcing some new threats for workers to walk off the job in more places if they don't see what they describe as serious progress. That's according to a union source talking with NBC News. So if Donald Trump is speaking to these auto workers, where is he not going to be? Well, he's not going to be in California on stage for the second Republican presidential primary debate. It's going to happen an hour after Donald Trump is set to begin speaking. Even though Mr. Trump's not going to be there, skipping the debate for the second time now, he is still going to be a shadow hovering over it, if you will. Our latest NBC News poll shows him leading the Republican race by 43 whole points. That's a lot of points. It'll be Ron DeSantis center stage, not Donald Trump, at least tonight. Let me bring in Vaughn Hilliard, who is live for us on the ground in Clinton Township, Michigan. Let's start with talking Donald Trump, because obviously we saw President Biden on the picket line 24 hours ago. That's a political statement. We see Donald Trump showing up in Michigan, also making a statement to speak to auto workers, but he's talking at a non-union facility, right? The UAW president, the auto workers president, isn't even going to meet with Mr. Trump here. Talk us through the dynamics of sort of the union message and the worker message.
Right. It's an important distinction here. There is sort of the pro-union side of this, which is the Joe Biden side, and then there's what Donald Trump claims to be pro-worker side of this. You said it. He is going to be here at a body parts manufacturing plant that is a non-union plant here. And contrast that with Joe Biden yesterday, who was actually on the picket line with striking UAW workers. We do not believe that Donald Trump is going to be taking that step. He's also not going to be joining UAW leadership, and Donald Trump has not weighed in on the specifics of the actual negotiations between the UAW and the big three auto companies here. And when you're talking about Donald Trump, of course, for every reason, he has to be here. When you look at the results of Michigan in 2016 and 2020, and the exit polling that came out of Michigan when it came to union workers. In 2020, he lost the union vote by about a 2-to-1 margin to Joe Biden. But it was much narrower in 2016 when he barely beat Hillary Clinton. It's an important vote here in the state of Michigan, Hallie.
Sure is, Vaughn. And when you look at the state of Michigan, we know that it is going to be a player in the general election a year and change from now. The people on the debate stage tonight are hoping to be the nominee. Right now, if the election were held today, it looks like Donald Trump would be it because he is having such a huge polling lead here. Give us the viewer's guide of what people should expect at tonight's debate. What are you going to be watching as you've got one ear on the speech and one ear on the debate?
There's two realities that have played out, Hallie. It's Donald Trump's campaign and everybody else's here. And the question, with just 3.5 months until the Iowa caucus, is anybody outside of a Chris Christie going to make a concerted effort to take punches at the clear front runner? Donald Trump has anywhere from 30 to 40 point advantage nationally, but also in places like Iowa and New Hampshire. And in the first debate, you saw Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Mike Pence. They squabble amongst themselves on important issues, from abortion to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the U.S. role in international affairs. At the same time, when it comes to Donald Trump, just last night, a New York judge found him liable for financial fraud. You didn't hear any talk about the allegations of Trump Organization and Donald Trump that have been levied against him in the state of New York or any of the indictments. So the question here tonight is, does anybody, despite Donald Trump not being there, try to lay a hand on Donald Trump as he tries to make this a general election campaign between him and Joe Biden, Hallie?
Vaughn Hilliard live for us there in Michigan. Vaughn, thank you so much. You can catch our special debate post-coverage later on tonight. My friend and colleague, Kristen Welker, will be in the chair. I'll be joining her along with a bunch of other people. That's tonight, 11 o'clock Eastern. However you're watching now on NBC News Now. A new warning tonight on what even a very short government shutdown could mean for people who are flying anywhere in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, etc. Listen to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
It would mean we would immediately have to stop training new air traffic controllers and furlough another 1,000 controllers who are already in the training pipeline. Even a shutdown lasting a few days could mean we will not hit our staffing and hiring targets next year.
There's already not enough air traffic controllers, so if this whole hiring and training pipeline is stopped by a government shutdown, you could see flight delays, you could see cancellations that stretch on. Right now, it seems to be, based on all of the signals from Capitol Hill, not a question of if, but when the government will shut down and how long it will last. Some movement on Capitol Hill today, emphasis on the word some. You could say very tiny amounts of little bitty baby steps on Capitol Hill. But at this point, I don't think there's a whole lot of optimism, even from the folks who are making some of these decisions here. You've got the Senate, for example, working on a short-term deal to keep the lights on for now. But a handful of House Republicans say they're not going to support anything that's only temporary. Let me bring in Hallie Vitale, who's joining us now. And let's start with sort of this new warning here from the Biden administration on what exactly a shutdown could mean for anybody who's trying to go on vacation or take a trip in the next few weeks.
Yeah, look, I mean, they're playing upon something that's already a problem, which is people have been having issues with air travel. Some of that's because of weather. Other parts of that are because of a lack of jobs being filled and the need to be training more of those people like air traffic controllers. We also know that one of the things that happens during shutdowns is the idea that some of those people who are still required to work, I'm thinking, for example, TSA agents who are doing those security checks, they're being asked to work without pay in perpetuity. That brings burnout, that brings people calling out sick. We've been here before. We know what this looks like, and that has nothing to say of the way that regular people are just impacted by the fact that they don't have the money coming in and they don't know when it's going to come in after that. That's really the question here for this shutdown, is not a matter of if, but how long. And that's one of the concerns that I hear most from Republicans, Hallie. The idea that shutting down the government isn't good. Most of them don't want to do it in the first place. But there is a question of, once it happens, how do you even get out of it?
And without putting the cart in front of the horse here, let's say it is 5:28 Eastern time. Let's say in 30 seconds from now at 5:29, we get some signal from the House and Senate that they're in agreement. They're not, right? Like, we're not close to that. Would they have the time to do what they need to do legislatively to get this done before Saturday night at 11:59 p.m.? In other words, when is it too late to actually try for something to avoid a shutdown?
Yeah, so first of all, if I lived in that fantasy land, that would be really wonderful, because fantasy land is the only place that would really happen. And here's why, Hallie. The reason that it's so hard for the Senate and the House to find any commonality right now is because there's no upside for Speaker McCarthy to do that. That's because the second that he looks left, even a little bit, to say, hey, maybe I don't mind what Schumer's doing, or hey, maybe I'm going to do something that House Democrats will help me get passed through my chamber, the moment he does that, that's when hardline conservatives pounce and he's on the line to potentially lose his job. That's what's looming over this whole thing, and it's what makes a sticky situation even stickier for McCarthy. It's why he's so beholden to these hardliners that have continuously held him up at each turn. It's because if he defies them, only one of them could trigger the job and could trigger a motion to vacate and try to oust him from his job. Now, that leads you into the whole other news cycle of, if not McCarthy, then who? What would that look like? Would Democrats save them? And that's why all of us are so wrapped up in how complex this is, because it's not just a matter of avoiding a shutdown. It's also doing that and seeing if McCarthy can keep his job.
Hallie Vitale live for us on the Hill as it appears Congress is barreling towards that shutdown. Hallie, thank you. Coming up, lots more to get to here on the show, including fire literally raining down on people at a wedding in Iraq. Dozens of people killed. We'll tell you what we're learning about how this horrific fire happened. Plus, a man says an airline reported him thinking he was trafficking kids who were actually his own. What he thinks should have been done before police were called. Next. The writer's strike is over, so some big shows are coming back. When you're going to be able to watch your favorite late-night hosts in action, coming up in the 5 things. But first tonight, musicians calling out American Airlines after he says he was reported for potentially kidnapping and trafficking kids. But they were his own children. Talking about this dad, David Ryan Harris. He's a guitarist who's played with stars like Dave Matthews. There he is with John Mayer. He's black, and his children are biracial. And he says he and his kids were flagged after landing on a flight from Atlanta to L.A. because a flight attendant, essentially, he says, didn't think they looked enough alike to be related. He talked with our team here at NBC News, and Morgan Chesky has more.
Tonight, musician David Ryan Harris still reeling after he says he was reported to authorities by American Airlines for suspected child trafficking. All he was really doing? Flying with his 2 biracial children.
In Los Angeles, we were met at the top of the jetway by an AA employee, and there were 4 police officers there as well.
Harris has played with massive recording artists Dave Matthews and John Mayer. Shocked by the interaction, he posted a series of videos to social media.
Apparently, a flight attendant had called ahead with some sort of concern that perhaps my mixed children weren't my children because they were unresponsive during an interaction with her.
Harris says his 7-year-old child is just shy.
There was one, maybe 30-second interaction with the flight attendant. And it seems to me that you should have to have a bit more to go on before you're able to call the police on someone.
He also says the airline could have easily verified his identity.
There's a flight manifest. They know people's names. I know there was internet on the plane. Any sort of Google search, you wouldn't have to dig very deep. You know, my Instagram page, if you'd gone there, you'd seen, pictures of me with those very same children.
We reached out to American Airlines, and they apologized for any misunderstanding that may have occurred, saying in part, "We strive to create a positive, welcoming environment for everyone who travels," adding that a member of their team has reached out to the customer to learn more and address their concerns.
The representative eventually did apologize.
As a former flight attendant, they are one of the first lines of defense in human trafficking, and they are trained to identify that.
But Sean Kathleen says that Harris's situation could have been handled better by the airline.
I thought that he brought up some really, really solid points, like, hey, check the manifest. So that would be a pretty, low lift.
Now Harris says he's turning his focus to advocacy, trying to find a way to prevent both human trafficking and experiences like his by doing things like checking children's IDs at airport check-in.
I do feel like that could have prevented this scenario from happening.
Morgan Chesky is joining us now. So, Morgan, what else does Harris say that companies, airlines should be doing to make sure something like this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, Hallie, great question. Harris says he spent the last several days looking deeper into this, and he talked more about what he called that first line of defense when it comes to security, and says that it really would take a lot of onus off of the flight attendants if children did have to provide some sort of identification, whether it be a birth certificate or an ID at TSA, at those security checkpoints, instead of going onto the plane where flight attendants are put in the position that this one was. He also went on to say that he was not put in handcuffs. He just had that conversation after disembarking off the plane. But he, of course, is saddened because he had to explain to his own children that they, in fact, did nothing wrong. They were confused about this whole ordeal, and they're very thankful to have it all behind them. Hallie?
Morgan Chesky, thank you very much for that reporting. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a horrific scene at a wedding in Iraq when a fire started, killing more than 100 people, hurting at least 100 others. So officials say the bride and groom had started their slow dance when apparently spark machines went off, but they set decorations and ceiling panels on fire. At one point, you can see some of those sparks coming down from the ceiling, some of those flames dropping. Officials are now ordering an investigation into just what happened. Number 2, late night shows are coming back now for the first time since May, now that the writers' strike is over and writers are going back to work. Real Time with Bill Maher says it'll come back this Friday. The other big late night shows, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, etc., going to come back on Monday night. Number 3, a landmark cannabis banking bill is moving forward in the Senate. It would protect banks that serve legal marijuana businesses. Basically, under current federal law, a bank could be punished for doing just that, even in places where cannabis is legal. But the senators behind the bill say that's a problem and that those companies, those small businesses, should have better financing options. Next up, number 4, Bruce Springsteen is postponing the rest of his tour dates this year because he's fighting this peptic ulcer disease. Springsteen says he's doing a little better and can't wait to see everybody next year. The rescheduled tour dates will come out next week. Number 5, take a look at this. NASA astronaut Frank Rubio coming back to Earth today after more than a year in space, 371 days. He says it's good to be home. I bet. He set the record for the longest U.S. space flight ever. NASA says it's given researchers a look into how spending a long time in space can affect people, like their bodies and their mind, etc. They don't have any more plans right now for missions lasting longer than a year at the moment. When we come back, more problems for Kia and Hyundai. Not only are a lot of them getting stolen, millions are also apparently at risk of catching fire. Owners being told to park outside. What you can do if you have one or if you're thinking about getting one. Next. Where do you hear what mechanics in South Carolina found when they popped open the hood of a car? I'm not going to spoil it for you, but we'll have that in a second in the local. First, however, car makers Kia and Hyundai, you know, those big car companies, huge recall out today over concerns that some of their cars can, like, literally randomly just burst into flames. We're talking about nearly 3.4 million cars affected by this recall. They're telling anybody who owns them to park outside, to park away from anything flammable until you can go and get your car fixed. The issue? Something to do with this faulty piece that can leak brake fluid and trigger an electrical short. It's just the latest in a string of recalls, as a spike in car thefts also is plaguing both companies, which are owned by the same parent company. You've probably seen some of the videos, but you may not believe the numbers driving this surge. Here's Aaron Gilchrist with more.
It's the car theft wave sweeping the nation, and big cities are struggling to keep up. The numbers are shocking. In Chicago, for example, thieves stole only 500 Kias and Hyundais in the first half of 2022. But by the end of that year, that number had ballooned to more than 8,300. And this year is on track to be even worse, with car thefts already surpassing 21,000, up 86% year to date. The city says Kias and Hyundais make up more than half. And it's not just Chicago, of course. Cities like Cleveland, St. Louis, and Baltimore have seen a surge, too.
Kia boys, stolen car haul.
It all started in 2021 when a viral TikTok trend called #KiaBoys began spreading across social media. It instructed would-be car thieves on how to quickly hotwire certain Kia models that lacked engine immobilizers.
Pull it down and then
breaking down.
This doesn't work with most cars. In fact, 96% of other vehicles sold in the U.S. shipped with immobilizers in 2015. But they're not required, and only about a quarter of Kias and Hyundais had the protection. That's why last month, Chicago joined several other American cities in suing the automakers, alleging they've contributed to a major increase in crime. Kia has said the suits are without merit, while Hyundai has said all its cars meet government anti-theft requirements. In light of the disturbing streak, Kia and Hyundai attempted a fix, offering a free software update available at dealerships and at mass giveaway events. The update requires the car's key to be in the ignition to start, but there have been reports of cars being stolen even after they got the update. One victim's father telling our Washington affiliate,
I would love to find out if the program was actually put in or the program failed.
When asked for comment, Hyundai responded by saying, our dealers across the country are maximizing the number of anti-theft software installations. Kia told NBC Washington that it's confident the software update works as intended. The car makers built their reputations advertising affordable cars for the average consumer.
I'll be there in 30 minutes.
That allowed the pair, which are owned by the same South Korean conglomerate, to become the third largest manufacturer in the world at one point. But even though some security systems may work, thieves still target the cars, which could mean a smashed window and an abandoned car when realizing it can't be hacked for a joyride, underscoring just how big of a challenge Kia and Hyundai face.
Aaron Gilchrist is joining us now. So you mentioned those lawsuits from these different cities here. What do Kia and Hyundai say about that?
So you've got, we mentioned them, some of them, Chicago, Baltimore, New York City, and several other cities as well. And they've essentially said that in Chicago, for example, that there are deceptive practices that are underway with these two companies, that they are negligent and that they are creating a public nuisance by not having these safety features and giving thieves the opportunity to steal these cars. They want restitution for customers. They want people to be paid for whatever damages they've had to deal with. They want the car makers to put these safety devices, this anti-theft immobilizer, in the cars that are already out there. They were already doing it for new cars, but they want them in the old cars now, too. Hyundai and Kia have both said, you know what, we think that this is not a safety defect that you're talking about here. They've said the lawsuits don't have any merit in so many cases, and they have not violated any federal standards by not having these immobilizers in. Now, they've done these software updates to the tune of more than 500,000 cars in the last year or so. They've also given out the steering wheel locks to help people from that perspective. Again, hundreds of thousands of those, but obviously these cities are saying that's not enough.
Aaron Gilchrist, super interesting. Thank you very much for bringing us that story. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of other stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Northeast Bureau, prosecutors in New York say a DNA swab from the Gilgo Beach serial killer's suspect matches the DNA police previously had collected from one of the victims in the case. Now, the suspect's lawyers are downplaying the evidence here, but officials also say the case against him could now grow to include some other unsolved murders. He is set to be back in court in November. Out of our Midwest Bureau, the football coach at an Ohio high school is stepping down after his team used racial slurs and the word Nazi to call out plays during a game. The team they were playing against comes from an area that's about 90% Jewish. The school superintendent says both the coach and the school have apologized for what they call hurtful and harmful speech that will not be tolerated. And out of our Southern Bureau, mechanics in South Carolina popped the hood of a car and found something, well, that's a little scarier than an engine that doesn't work. That is an albino boa constrictor. That is an 8-foot-long albino boa constrictor wrapped around the engine. Obviously not very common in the area. They think it's probably somebody's pet. They're going to take care of it. They're going to just adopt it, I guess, until the owner comes forward. That is a brave move. Coming up, a remarkable story about how officials tried to find the mother of a baby abandoned at an airport by pulling women off a plane, allegedly searching their bodies without consent. What the airline is now saying next. A senior Qatar Airways executive today saying an incident involving invasive gynecological exams of passengers, women on planes, will not happen again. That statement to the Australian government comes after Qatar Airways was denied a request to double its current number of flights to Australia. It wants to expand business, but Australia says no. That's after 13 Australian women say they were taken off a flight from Doha to Sydney at gunpoint by guards back in 2020. and that they were subjected to these invasive gynecological exams without consent. Qatari officials say they were trying to identify the mother of a newborn baby that had been found abandoned in a trash can at the airport in Doha. Qatar Airways senior vice president describing what happened as a, I'm quoting here, one-off, very extreme incident that he says will not be repeated. Matt Bradley is joining us now. Matt, it is just extraordinary with some of these details here. Qatar is looking to expand business in Australia. At the same time, they're being sued by 5 of these women here in Australian federal court. Walk us through this.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complicated story, and it spans, 3 years, as you described. This is a slow-motion scandal, and this happened all the way back in October of 2020 when 13 women were taken off of airplanes and made to essentially undergo some sort of gynecological exam. It sounded like in ambulances that were parked next door to these airplanes. So this was a rushed, frenzied, chaotic scene. If you can imagine, a lot of outrage and a lot of lingering anger from these 13 women, 5 of whom, as you mentioned, are now suing. Now, we need to mention, though, this parliamentary hearing in which all of these people are making these comments, including that vice president of Qatar Airways, that doesn't really have anything to do directly with this incident from 2020. This is a business story. This is about why Qatar's application to double its flights from Qatar to Australia was rejected. And there's a lot of moving parts here that don't involve this incident where the gynecological exams were used against these 13 women. There's also questions of whether or not Qantas, which is sort of the state airline, but it's actually a private airline, it doesn't get any state money or protection, actually intervened to stop Qatar Airways from doubling the number of flights that it services to this subcontinent, to Australia. So that's kind of the scandal here. It's a business story, and that's why there's this parliamentary hearing. And that's why we're hearing from these senior executives, because there's still so much anger about this incident. And it is one of the reasons we heard from the transport minister saying this was one of the reasons that I considered, or it was the context around this incident that caused me to stop the application and give no explanation to Qatar Airways. And that's what brings us here today. Hallie?
Big international news coming out of Australia and Qatar. Matt Bradley, thank you very much for that. Still to come, Taylor Swift doing numbers on different charts now. How she affected a podcast, TV viewership, and football tickets. It is the Taylor Swift effect in full force. Wait till you hear this. Coming up. That's it for us for this hour. We've got a lot more coverage coming up right now. We're coming on the air with police in Philadelphia in just the last couple of minutes, saying they're going to boost their presence all across that city tonight as they're shutting down liquor stores and making dozens of arrests after a violent mass burglary spree targeting places across the city. It is the latest in a wave of crime, or at least in high-profile incidents of crime in America. So what can be done to stop it? Plus, the top Senate Democrat finally talking about an indicted colleague's future after Senator Bob Menendez is pleading not guilty today in federal court. What Chuck Schumer is and is not saying ahead of a key meeting tomorrow. We'll tell you about it. Plus, an Army private is now out of North Korean hands and, as we speak, on his way home, headed back here to Texas. How U.S. officials got him back after he bolted across the DMZ this summer. Plus, a well-known black musician in a stunning mix-up, an airline employee claiming he kidnapped and trafficked kids, his own biracial kids, why he says this never should have happened, and how it could have been stopped. Plus, some new scary warnings from a couple of big car manufacturers, what they want owners to do in case their cars suddenly catch fire. We've got a look at that coming up later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and tonight we're starting in Philadelphia as police there saying, even as we've been on the air, they are stepping up their presence on the ground in Philly tonight. That's after what you're looking at here, this chaos, basically. People tackling crowds of people, others running through the streets and out of stores with stuff they stole, it looks like. We're now learning that all the liquor stores in the city are shutting down today after 18 of them had their stores robbed and damaged during this violence. Look at this. Broken windows. You saw those smashed bottles outside. Other video from the scene shows a bunch of people running in and out of an Apple store with, look at here, they're coming out with what looks like phones, like Apple products in their hands. Police say the crowd targeted other businesses like this Lululemon, a Foot Locker, that a couple of guns were recovered. Suspects rounded up, with the DA's office saying 49 adults and 3 minors have been arrested so far. They're still being processed. They also say we shouldn't be calling this looting, that this is burglary. This is theft. It is one of the snapshots of crime in America. Look at Oakland, where business owners are striking this week. They're demanding to talk to the governor about protecting their stores because they have concerns about crime and safety. Plus, some high-profile break-ins in cities like Baltimore, San Francisco, Seattle, New York. We're seeing retailers respond. Target, for example, is now planning to shut down 9 of its stores across the country, as we told you on this show last night, because of, in part, safety concerns, violence, robberies. Rahima Ellis is joining us now live from Philly. Bring us up to speed on what we're hearing from police. It sounds like they're going to have more patrols out tonight.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're saying, Hallie, that they are increasing their police presence. They did it during the day. They're going to do it tonight. It is exactly in response to all of what you just mentioned went on in this city last night. In addition, they're saying they're putting out word for people to call 911 if they're aware of any kind of ongoing criminal activity or if they have any information about anyone who might have been connected with what they call criminal activity that happened here last night. This is the kind of thing that's got people all over the city concerned. Listen to what a couple of folks told us about how they feel about what happened.
It feels like it's a little bit overwhelming in the sense it's like, what can they do? I mean, especially if it's like a flash mob or it's a larger incident, it feels like it's a little out of control.
I'm very cautious, but I'm not afraid.
And one of the things we should mention is these streets have been filled with people today, folks saying to us, yes, they are cautious, they're not afraid, but they are disappointed and disheartened that this kind of thing happened in the first place. Hallie?
Real quick, Rahima, just because we've been showing some video of it, or I know there is some, this influencer, a pretty popular influencer, seems to be showing up or have recorded some of this that happened, right? What do we know?
Yeah, police are concerned about this. What we know is that an influencer known to her fans as Meatball, with 200,000 followers on Instagram and some 400,000 TikTok followers, was in real time streaming this last night, this chaos that was going on here in Central City, Philadelphia, and in North Philadelphia. Police are very concerned about. The question becomes one of, in the 21st century, what do you do? How do you stop it? And that's a question I think that we're going to be hearing more about. If they can figure out a way to stop this, we call her an influencer. They're concerned about whether or not did this person influence other people to do something, not intentionally. There's no instance that we have heard of that this was a plan to influence it, but authorities are concerned, Hallie.
You look big picture, Rahima, and what is happening in Philadelphia has, I think, is shining a spotlight on some of these other high-profile incidents we've seen in other cities around the country. And police, officials, city leaders all grappling with a very similar question of how do they get a handle on it? What can be done?
You're saying exactly what they're saying to themselves, and that is, how do we handle this? Let me show you a full-screen tweet of the mayor's, what the mayor put out about it. First of all, he was thanking police for their quick response to the chaos that was seen on the streets last night, and also saying that this was a sickening display of opportunistic criminal activity, and we will not stand for it. The question becomes one of, how will they make certain it doesn't happen again? What kind of penalties will these people pay who have been arrested, charged with burglary and theft, that will act as a deterrent? That's yet to be seen. Hallie?
Rahima Ellis, live for us in Philadelphia. Rahima, thank you. The mother of a suspect wanted for the murder of a young tech CEO late today, exclusively telling NBC News she wants her son to turn himself in because she's worried, she says, that police are going to kill him. I'm quoting her there. Police are looking for Jason Billingsley, who they're now connecting to another case involving attempted murder, arson, and rape last week. With police just telling our team that 2 adults were found with multiple burns and a 5-year-old child with smoke inhalation. All of them were hospitalized in that other incident, again connected to Billingsley. We know he got out of prison early, less than a year ago, after only serving 9 of a 30-year sentence for a first-degree sex offense. We still don't know for sure why he got out so early. But the mayor of Baltimore says he never should have been released. I want to bring in Ron Allen, who is live for us in Baltimore. And let me start with Pavel Lapierre, the victim here, this young tech CEO, 26, in Baltimore. In just about 25, 30 minutes from now, we are going to see essentially a memorial service for her, a vigil to honor her life, as we're just hearing from her family, who says she made an impact on every person that she touched. Talk us through what we know about her and where this investigation goes.
Indeed, Hallie. And yes, behind me you can see that there are people gathering here in the heart of Baltimore at this memorial service that's about to begin any moment. We expect that there will be her team of 30, that was her company, along with her co-founder, and others from the tech community, because she was part of a community here, and that community is rallying around her. She was something of an iconic figure, yes, just 26 years old, here as a college student at Johns Hopkins a few years ago, decided to stay and not move to some of the other big tech centers around the country. And people admired her for that and respected her for that. We've heard a lot of glowing things from her colleagues today as we've been talking to them. Here's her co-founder, Dawood Davis, who started the company with her and said that it was about helping others as much as it was about helping themselves get started. Take a listen.
She wore her heart and her values on her sleeve, and she never had an emotion that she could hide. She was just wise beyond her years. She could see things that no one else could see. Honestly, I think of her as like a superhero in that way.
And the reason that she was so admired is because this was business, this was tech with an impact, a social impact. She really wanted to disrupt the industry, her colleagues say. She wanted to change things. She wanted to break up the old boys club, if you will. And she was about diversity and inclusion and getting people into the tech space who are disadvantaged and who are not usually able to access that type of career, that type of entrepreneurial activities or opportunities and so forth. So again, yes, we expect there to be a huge outpouring of grief and sorrow. People are really upset because this seems so random. So far, the police have not revealed anything that connects the suspect to her. This happened in the apartment building where she lived and worked. There seems to be no other evidence of any other crime there, a robbery or anything. So a lot of unanswered questions adding to this really profound sense of grief that people here across Baltimore are feeling tonight. Hallie?
By so many accounts, Ron, this incredible young woman has touched so many lives. And the question now is, how did she die, right? Like, what are the circumstances surrounding her death and the search for this person who police have called potentially violent and dangerous here? Talk us through this essentially manhunt now that is happening in and around Baltimore with these other cases that he may be connected to here as we're learning more about those tonight.
Right, and the police have posted a $6,000 reward. That's new tonight because they're trying to get more information. But obviously the manhunt is intensifying because, yes, we're hearing that the suspect is connected to that one case you mentioned that happened about a week ago involving arson, involving attempted murder is the allegation. The police are looking back in their files over the past year to see if there are other things that connect this individual to other crimes, not just in Baltimore, but in the surrounding area where that other case happened in a suburb of the city. So, yes, it seems that the situation here, the investigation is deepening. And again, there are just so many unanswered questions. And the real thing about this that's really painful for so many people seems to be that it just seems so random. There doesn't seem to be anything that connects her to the suspect. And there is no understanding of what the possible motive could be for why this individual allegedly attacked and killed her.
Ron Allen, live for us in Baltimore. Thank you very much for being there and for shining a light on Papa LaPere and her life and legacy. Appreciate it. Let's take you back here to Washington now, where the Senate's top Democrat is not yet calling for an indicted colleague to resign. Instead, Senator Chuck Schumer is indicating he is going to wait for a key lunch tomorrow, this key meeting when Senator Bob Menendez is set to speak to his colleagues in this setting for the first time since Menendez was hit with those new federal bribery charges. Here's how Schumer laid it out.
Like you, I was just deeply disappointed, disturbed when I read the indictment. Look, I've known Senator Menendez a very long time, and it was truly, truly upsetting. Tomorrow, he will address the Democratic caucus, and we'll see what happens after that.
This is after the second highest ranking Democrat, Dick Durbin, you see him here, basically said that if Menendez's fellow New Jerseyans, Senator Cory Booker, Governor Phil Murphy, think that Menendez should go, then he should resign. This means now that nearly 2/3 of the Democratic caucus, meaning 30 senators on the Democratic side, look at that graphic, think that Menendez should step down. That graphic we keep showing you, more and more pictures get added to it as the days go on. All of it, as Menendez and his wife, along with 2 of 3 other co-defendants, walked out of a New York federal courtroom this morning after pleading not guilty. I want to bring in our team covering this. NBC's Tom Winter is outside that courthouse in New York. Sahil Kapoor is live for us on Capitol Hill. Tom, let me start with you here. This moment in court for Senator Menendez. We have seen high-profile political individuals, leaders, show up in court. I'm thinking, of course, of former President Donald Trump. Bob Menendez is a sitting U.S. senator showing up in court to face these allegations here. It is a moment. Give us a sense of what the scene has been like.
Yeah, talk about a moment. I mean, this courthouse behind me and the person I'm working with today, Bob Riggio, and I, we've been covering cases down here for over 20 years. Go back to Martha Stewart, very reminiscent of some of the very high-profile trials we've had down here, including Michael Cohen, the former personal attorney to Donald Trump. And today, to your point, Hallie, the sitting senator of the United States, sitting about 10 feet from me, facing charges here, and pretty serious ones, these bribery charges, pleading not guilty. He's got some restrictions here going forward, specifically on his personal travel. So when you look at the reason why he was released today, he's got a $100,000 personal reconnaissance bond, but he also has to hold on, or give back, rather, his personal passport. He can keep his official Senate passport so he can travel overseas. But right now, he's going to be limited in his travel outside the United States. Obviously, this case has overseas connections to Egypt, Hallie.
Talk me through some of those overseas connections, because our colleagues here at NBC are also reporting tonight on a separate investigation by the FBI into whether or not Egyptian intel services had anything to do with this alleged scheme. Explain that, and how Nadine Menendez, the senator's wife, plays into this.
Right, so you're talking about the reporting quarterback by our colleague Jonathan Dienst. That reporting centers on an FBI investigation that is a component of what has been charged here, specifically a counterintelligence investigation. What does that mean? Does it mean whether a foreign government had some sort of input here in either trying to solicit information or bring information to or influence, rather, the senator and his wife? And this goes through the senator's wife because she was the one that interacted with a New Jersey businessman who's been charged in this case as a means of effectively trying to solicit information about the U.S. presence in Egypt, and also trying to, inviting at one point, the senator and his wife to an Egyptian official's home. So there's a number of different connections that are going on here, Hallie, and that's something that counterintelligence officials will take a look at.
Tom Winter, thank you very much. I want to bring in Sahil Kapoor live for us now at the Capitol. Pull on this thread of intelligence a little bit, Sahil, because we know that senators who serve our country, right, who are in the building where you're standing, have access to intel that you or I might not be able to see, for example. We know that the senator is not going to be the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee anymore for now. That happened just in the last couple of hours here. We'd expected that to happen. That had been telegraphed. What does this mean for his access to other information in his role as senator, if not chair, as he's trying to do the work for people in New Jersey?
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. Bob Menendez has officially lost his chairmanship of the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee as he battles these charges. It's the second time in a decade that Menendez has lost his position as a top Democrat on a committee. The last time was when he was fighting the previous corruption charges in the federal indictment that came down. He escaped that one with a hung jury. Wasn't exactly acquitted, but did not get charged, and he returned to the Senate. It looks like he's hoping for something similar to happen this time. He insists he's going to fight the charges. He's declaring his own innocence. And in the meantime, that is the only punishment that Senate Democrats have so far doled out to Menendez while he fights these charges. He's not going to be chairman of the committee, but he still retains his other, his various seats on other committees. He still remains a voting member of the Senate. There are 30 Democrats who have called on him to resign. At this point, it's easier to count those, who haven't called on him to resign. And some of them say they're not commenting only because they're on the ethics committee and, are not going to weigh in on a matter that could come before them. He's expected to speak to Senate Democrats at a lunch meeting tomorrow. We will see if the number grows as a result of that.
So based on your reporting, Sahil, what does Senator Menendez need to say tomorrow to make sure that number 30 doesn't grow to 40 or more?
Hard to say, Hallie. I think most Democrats, the majority of the conference, has already made up their mind that these charges are too serious for him to continue serving. Yes, they all agree he, has the right to, be presumed innocent until proven guilty. They don't agree that he has the right to continue being a senator while he does that. He insists he's innocent, and some of the Democrats who say they aren't at this moment calling on him to resign, they say they want to hear from him. They say he has a right to make his case. He has a right to defend himself. It sounds like he's going to do that tomorrow in the political context. In a legal context, that's a whole other kettle of fish. There are options the Senate will have if they all decide that he should go and he refuses to go. They could potentially look at a censure. They could look at expulsion. That takes 2/3 of the Senate to do it. It's almost never happened. It has never, in fact, happened until since the Civil War, all the way back to the 1860s. They could theoretically revoke his security clearance, otherwise strip him of committee assignments. None of that quite being discussed yet, but we'll know tomorrow.
Sahil Kapoor, we'll be looking for you then. Thank you. Tonight, the Army private who intentionally ran into North Korea is now back in American custody. He is on his way to Texas as we speak for medical treatment after North Korea says it expelled him. Lester Holt caught up with the head of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, as this news was breaking. Listen.
The important thing, of course, is he's safe. We'll get him reunited with his family and bring him back to the United States.
More tonight on Nightly on that, but we know that Travis King is set to arrive at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio sometime overnight for what they call reintegration. This is pretty standard for people who are prisoners of war, who are hostages, for example, to help them deal with post-traumatic stress, any trauma, etc. You'll remember when King bolted across the DMZ, that demilitarized zone border that separates South Korea from North Korea. He'd been on a public tour over the summer. It was huge news when it happened, with so many questions about why and what would happen to him next. Well, now we know. We know that apparently U.S. officials say that the North Koreans brought King to China recently. He was turned over to Swedish officials, and they turned him over to the U.S. military. Josh Letterman is joining us now. Big question here, Josh. Why now? North Korea doesn't do things simply willy-nilly. It is a nation that is constantly seeking attention and the spotlight on the international stage. Why would they hand over this American soldier, this American Army private who'd been in their custody?
It's the big mystery ever since early this morning when the news first came from the North Koreans that they planned to expel him. And in fact, Hallie, for any suspicion that maybe this was a sign the North Koreans were extending an olive branch to the U.S. or suddenly wanted more diplomacy, we've heard just in the last couple of hours from Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, speaking to a legislative session with all of the typical bombast and hyperbole about how North Korea needs to exponentially increase its nuclear weapons because of the threat from the United States. So it doesn't appear that there is any effort by the North Koreans to do us a favor. And yet at the same time, the U.S. maintains that they made no concessions to North Korea in exchange for releasing Travis King. We heard from the State Department spokesman Matt Miller describing how it's kind of a mystery to them, too. Take a look.
I would not want to speculate on any motivations on the North Korean side. I would not see this as the sign of some breakthrough. I think it's a one-off with them being willing to return this private.
The other huge question mark hanging over this situation, Hallie, is what is going to happen to Travis King once he's back in the U.S. Obviously, there's going to be medical care and psychological counseling. But remember, he was already facing disciplinary proceedings in the U.S. when he was supposed to leave South Korea and instead took a bus to the DMZ and crossed into North Korea. He's also now been declared AWOL by the U.S. military for having left and gone into North Korea. And so there are real questions about whether he could still face court-martial consequences, such as potentially dishonorable discharge, prison time in a military jail. The U.S. saying they will cross that bridge when they get to it. But first, they're going to focus on reuniting him with his family.
Bigger picture, Josh, what kind of hints can we take away from this as to what this could mean for the broader relationship between the U.S. and North Korea?
The short answer is we don't know yet. The U.S. says today they would love diplomacy with North Korea. They would love for this to be the start of some type of better relationship where they can actually talk about the nuclear program, talk about human rights concerns in North Korea. But they're not holding their breath. And as of now, there are no indications that this could or will lead to something bigger than simply the release of this one American today, Hallie.
Josh Letterman, thank you very much. In just a couple of hours from now over in Michigan, we will see former President Donald Trump talk with striking auto workers, not on the picket lines, but at an assembly plant, a non-union plant, as that huge strike against the big three car companies could get bigger later on this week. That's because the union president is putting in place the potential for more workers to walk off the job in more places if what they call serious progress isn't made. This is according to a source talking with NBC News. So if Donald Trump is speaking in Michigan, that means he's not going to be on the stage in California tonight, where that second Republican presidential primary debate is set to begin later on this evening. Who will be on that stage? 7 of the former president's primary contenders, including Mike Pence, you see there, Chris Christie, Ron DeSantis. Even though Donald Trump won't be there in person, he'll still hover over it. It's because he's stomping in the polls. Our latest NBC News numbers show him leading this Republican race by 43 points. If that sounds like a lot to you, it is. Let me bring in Vaughn Hilliard, who's live for us on the ground in Clinton Township, Michigan. So let's talk about this speech. Who's showing up for it, and what's the message from the former president?
Right, as it is with politics, especially presidential ones, Hallie, there's a lot of layers involved. And here, just outside of Detroit, Michigan, it's no different. Joe Biden showing up on the picket line itself alongside UAW leadership yesterday. Donald Trump not going to the actual picket line and not appearing with UAW leadership, but instead he is here at a non-union body part manufacturing plant. I was talking with one striking worker who was here in attendance, and he said, of course, that he would prefer for Donald Trump to be on the picket line or at a UAW shop, but he said based off of the harsh words of UAW leadership toward Donald Trump, he's not surprised that Trump looked elsewhere. There are several UAW members here, and when you look at exit polling from the 2020 election, when it was Biden versus Donald Trump, well, about 2 out of 3 union household voters voted for Joe Biden over Donald Trump. So it is far and away not 100% for Joe Biden, but Donald Trump is looking to gain some of the support that he lost in 2020 compared to 2016 when he narrowly beat Hillary Clinton here in the state. And by coming and addressing union households here, that is part of the effort.
So talk about then the debates, a different stage, right, from the one that Donald Trump will take today, and that is the debate stage, which in some ways is kind of jockeying for what would be second position, given where the former president is in the polls. So open up your viewer's guide. Walk us through what we can expect. I will tell you that based on my conversations with some sources in various campaigns, everybody's going to try to be standing out. We know that because that's where this race is right now.
Right, it's go time in order to not only make future debates, but also to make the case to donors and, frankly, Republican voters around the country that you've still got a shot in this, that this is a moment where they've got to go and stand out. So if you're Ron DeSantis, you're Nikki Haley, you're Tim Scott, this is a moment here. And when you look at some of the issues, of course, abortion could very well be a big issue discussed on stage. Russia's aggression and war and invasion of Ukraine and the U.S. role that aid in the country should play could very well be a topic of conversation. But Donald Trump was really not a factor in that first debate in Milwaukee last month, and we should expect it to potentially be a little different. Chris Christie has already previewed that he is planning to take on Donald Trump explicitly, despite Trump not being on the stage. And frankly, when you look at national polling, but also polling out of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, somebody's got to make a dent in Donald Trump's lead, and at least to the Republican viewers who are watching that debate here tonight, make the case that they should be the nominee over the current frontrunner, who in a great number of polls has anywhere from 40 to 50% of support right now.
Vaughn Hilliard, live for us there in Michigan. Lots to watch, Vaughn. Thank you very much. And lots to watch right here on NBC News Now for our post-debate coverage. Our friend and colleague, Kristen Welker, will be anchoring it. I will also see you there to talk through all things GOP debate. That's coming up tonight, 11 o'clock Eastern, right here on News Now. A new warning tonight on what even a short government shutdown could mean for people who fly. And spoiler, the news does not appear to be good, according to the Transportation Secretary. Listen.
It would mean we would immediately have to stop training new air traffic controllers and furlough another 1,000 controllers who are already in the training pipeline. Even a shutdown lasting a few days could mean we will not hit our staffing and hiring targets next year.
So there's already an existing shortage of air traffic controllers, meaning if the hiring and training pipeline is stopped by a shutdown, you could see flight delays and cancellations stretch along. Right now, it appears that it's not so much a question of if the government shuts down, but how long a government shutdown could last. If you're like, okay, Hallie, well, what's the latest today then? Has there been progress? Has there been movement? Well, there's been a little bit of movement. You got the House pushing ahead with spending bills, but those are non-starters in the Senate. You've got the Senate working on a short-term deal to keep the government open and running. But on the House side, you've got a group of Republicans who says they don't want to do anything temporary. Hallie Vitale is joining us now. So what changes, right? I mean, if you've got both sides still pretty far apart here, and we say both sides, there's a lot on the shoulders here of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. What is his plan here for the next, let's say, 48, 72 hours until it gets too close to avoid a shutdown altogether?
Yeah, look, that's kind of what we're waiting to hear at this point, Hallie, because the most movement that we've seen is probably that trash can being wheeled behind me just in the last few minutes, because votes are happening right now on the House floor. Of course, we spoke to the Speaker on his way in, and he reiterated his optimism that he would somehow find a way through this. But this plan seems to be changing and, frankly, coming together in real time. We're talking to key members who lead essential factions of this Republican conference, and they haven't even seen the details of what's actually in this proposed continuing resolution, which, again, would just buy the Speaker and Republicans a little more time to hammer out the rest of those spending bills. And there's still that contingent of Republicans who will never vote to do that. That continues to leave McCarthy at an impasse. And it's the question that we asked him multiple times yesterday. Does he have the votes for the plan that he seems to be committed to at this point? He dodged on those questions because we still don't know the answer. There's the world in which he could just put this on the floor and, again, call his conference his bluff. And that could lead to a shutdown. So a lot of question marks. When you talk about progress, I love that you're describing it as like a little bit of progress, because that's really all we've seen at this point. And we don't even know if a little bit of progress still gets us to the goal of avoiding a shutdown.
Yeah, nibbling around the edges may be just that, a nibble, and not like a big enough bite in this. I'm struck by we've been talking about how long other shutdowns have lasted. We've been showing that. Yeah. Some have lasted a few days, some have lasted a few weeks. What you're hearing from the Transportation Secretary today and from the Biden administration is that even if this shutdown is short, right, even if it's not a long shutdown, it could still be super problematic for anybody trying to go on vacation or a business trip or fly anywhere in the next little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is the thing about shutdowns. They can cause new problems, but they can also make old problems worse. I'm just looking down the hallway now because it does seem like Speaker McCarthy is walking towards us. We'll see if he'll stop and take a question or two. Mr. McCarthy, Speaker McCarthy, any progress in terms of the CR? Yeah. And, of course, he's walking right by us. We always try to toss a question, Hallie. Sometimes he stops, sometimes he doesn't. But, look, it's the same question we've been asking for days and days and days. Now it's also a question, though, that President Biden is getting from reporters. Listen to what he said today about the prospect of a shutdown.
I don't think anything's inevitable in politics. If I knew that, I would have done it already.
It's honestly a pretty good answer, Hallie, because it's true. While nothing is inevitable, it does seem like the dark parlor game up here on the Hill is not asking about if a shutdown is going to happen, but rather how long one might last and how they would get out of it when it happens.
Hallie Vitale, I guess, as they say in politics, time will tell, with not much time left to figure it out. Hallie, thanks. Coming up tonight, new details tonight around the inmate mistakenly released in Indiana, what officials are saying now about where he is. Plus, some new numbers showing just how popular those drugs Ozempic and Wegovy are, and it may be an undercount. We'll tell you why in the 5 things. A new warning tonight on what even a short government shutdown could mean for people who fly. And spoiler, the news does not appear to be good, according to the Transportation Secretary. Listen.
It would mean we would immediately have to stop training new air traffic controllers and furlough another 1,000 controllers who are already in the training pipeline. Even a shutdown lasting a few days could mean we will not hit our staffing and hiring targets next year.
So there's already an existing shortage of air traffic controllers, meaning if the hiring and training pipeline is stopped by a shutdown, you could see flight delays and cancellations stretch along. Right now, it appears that it's not so much a question of if the government shuts down, but how long a government shutdown could last. If you're like, okay, Hallie, well, what's the latest today then? Has there been progress? Has there been movement? Well, there's been a little bit of movement. You got the House pushing ahead with spending bills, but those are non-starters in the Senate. You've got the Senate working on a short-term deal to keep the government open and running. But on the House side, you've got a group of Republicans who says they don't want to do anything temporary. Hallie Vitale is joining us now. So what changes, right? I mean, if you've got both sides still pretty far apart here, and we say both sides, there's a lot on the shoulders here of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. What is his plan here for the next, let's say, 48, 72 hours until it gets too close to avoid a shutdown altogether?
Yeah, look, that's kind of what we're waiting to hear at this point, Hallie, because the most movement that we've seen is probably that trash can being wheeled behind me just in the last few minutes, because votes are happening right now on the House floor. Of course, we spoke to the Speaker on his way in, and he reiterated his optimism that he would somehow find a way through this. But this plan seems to be changing and, frankly, coming together in real time. We're talking to key members who lead essential factions of this Republican conference, and they haven't even seen the details of what's actually in this proposed continuing resolution, which, again, would just buy the Speaker and Republicans a little more time to hammer out the rest of those spending bills. And there's still that contingent of Republicans who will never vote to do that. That continues to leave McCarthy at an impasse. And it's the question that we asked him multiple times yesterday. Does he have the votes for the plan that he seems to be committed to at this point? He dodged on those questions because we still don't know the answer. There's the world in which he could just put this on the floor and, again, call his conference his bluff. And that could lead to a shutdown. So a lot of question marks. When you talk about progress, I love that you're describing it as like a little bit of progress, because that's really all we've seen at this point. And we don't even know if a little bit of progress still gets us to the goal of avoiding a shutdown.
Yeah, nibbling around the edges may be just that, a nibble, and not like a big enough bite in this. I'm struck by we've been talking about how long other shutdowns have lasted. We've been showing that. Yeah. Some have lasted a few days, some have lasted a few weeks. What you're hearing from the Transportation Secretary today and from the Biden administration is that even if this shutdown is short, right, even if it's not a long shutdown, it could still be super problematic for anybody trying to go on vacation or a business trip or fly anywhere in the next little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is the thing about shutdowns. They can cause new problems, but they can also make old problems worse. I'm just looking down the hallway now because it does seem like Speaker McCarthy is walking towards us. We'll see if he'll stop and take a question or two. Mr. McCarthy, Speaker McCarthy, any progress in terms of the CR? Yeah. And, of course, he's walking right by us. We always try to toss a question, Hallie. Sometimes he stops, sometimes he doesn't. But, look, it's the same question we've been asking for days and days and days. Now it's also a question, though, that President Biden is getting from reporters. Listen to what he said today about the prospect of a shutdown.
I don't think anything's inevitable in politics. If I knew that, I would have done it already.
It's honestly a pretty good answer, Hallie, because it's true. While nothing is inevitable, it does seem like the dark parlor game up here on the Hill is not asking about if a shutdown is going to happen, but rather how long one might last and how they would get out of it when it happens.
Hallie Vitale, I guess, as they say in politics, time will tell, with not much time left to figure it out. Hallie, thanks. Coming up tonight, new details tonight around the inmate mistakenly released in Indiana, what officials are saying now about where he is. Plus, some new numbers showing just how popular those drugs Ozempic and Wegovy are, and it may be an undercount. We'll tell you why in the 5 things. Tonight, a man's calling out American Airlines after he says he was reported for potentially kidnapping and trafficking kids. They were his own children. Talking about this dad, David Ryan Harris. He's a guitarist who's played with rock stars like, you see it here, John Mayer. He's black, and his kids are biracial. And he says he and his children were flagged after landing on a flight from Atlanta to L.A. because a flight attendant essentially didn't think they looked enough alike to be related, he says. He talked with our team here at NBC News. Morgan Chesky has more.
Tonight, musician David Ryan Harris still reeling after he says he was reported to authorities by American Airlines for suspected child trafficking. All he was really doing? Flying with his 2 biracial children.
In Los Angeles, we were met at the top of the jetway by an AA employee, and there were 4 police officers there as well.
Harris has played with massive recording artists Dave Matthews and John Mayer. Shocked by the interaction, he posted a series of videos to social media.
Apparently, a flight attendant had called ahead with some sort of concern that perhaps my mixed children weren't my children because they were unresponsive during an interaction with her.
Harris says his 7-year-old child is just shy.
There was one, maybe 30-second interaction with the flight attendant. And it seems to me that you should have to have a bit more to go on before you're able to call the police on someone.
He also says the airline could have easily verified his identity.
There's a flight manifest. They know people's names. I know there was internet on the plane. Any sort of Google search, you wouldn't have to dig very deep. You know, my Instagram page, if you'd gone there, you'd seen, pictures of me with those very same children.
We reached out to American Airlines, and they apologized for any misunderstanding that may have occurred, saying in part, "We strive to create a positive, welcoming environment for everyone who travels," adding that a member of their team has reached out to the customer to learn more and address their concerns.
The representative eventually did apologize.
As a former flight attendant, they are one of the first lines of defense in human trafficking, and they are trained to identify that.
But Sean Kathleen says that Harris's situation could have been handled better by the airline.
I thought that he brought up some really, really solid points, like, hey, check the manifest. So that would be a pretty, low lift.
Now Harris says he's turning his focus to advocacy, trying to find a way to prevent both human trafficking and experiences like his by doing things like checking children's IDs at airport check-in.
I do feel like that could have prevented this scenario from happening.
Morgan Chesky is joining us now. Morgan, I wonder what else Harris says about what he would like to see airlines doing to make sure that parents like him don't end up in this kind of situation again.
Yeah, Harris says that he's tried to spend the last several weeks, Hallie, looking into ways to avoid this whole situation that he lived through. And he did bring up a really good point here, talking about that line of defense, saying that it shouldn't be on the flight attendants to have to look specifically for these situations of child trafficking. He knows their heart was in the right place, but he brought up the point, what if TSA checked a child's identification or a birth certificate even to make sure that they were exactly who they needed to be prior to the boarding of the flight? Following that encounter when he disembarked and was greeted by police, he did make a point to say he was not arrested. At no point did they place handcuffs on him. But he expressed a lot of sadness because his children thought they had done something wrong. He had to reassure them they were both fine. It was just an unfortunate situation all round. Hallie?
Morgan Chesky, thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a wedding in Iraq turning into just a horrific scene when a fire started, killing dozens of people, more than 100 people, hurting at least 100 others. Officials say that the bride and groom had begun to dance when spark machines went off. You can see it here. Apparently things on the ceiling caught fire, started dropping down, those flames coming down from the top. Officials are ordering an investigation into what happened here. Number 2, late night shows are coming back for the first time since May, now that the writers' strike is over and writers are going back to work. Real Time with Bill Maher says it'll come back on Friday. Shows like The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel Live, they will come back on Monday. Number 3, that murder suspect we told you about who was accidentally released from a jail in Indiana has been captured today in Minnesota, according to officials. He walked out of that Indianapolis jail a couple weeks ago, apparently because of a clerical error. 2 people ended up fired over it. Number 4, Michigan State officially firing football coach Mel Tucker today. You'll remember he was suspended earlier this month as the school looks into a sexual misconduct complaint, which Tucker claims was consensual. Michigan State says he, I'm quoting here, brought public disrespect, contempt, and ridicule upon the university, and that the case will continue. Tucker says the allegations against him are completely false. Number 5, we've all heard about the very high demand for diabetes and obesity drugs. Well, now some new numbers are backing up just how intense that demand is. With a new report finding that healthcare providers in this country wrote more than 9 million prescriptions in the last 3 months of 2022 for drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy. Prescriptions went up 300% from early 2020 to the end of last year. The number is probably an undercount, too, experts say, because it doesn't include the people paying out of pocket for these drugs. When we come back, a big recall tonight about some pretty popular cars. Why Hyundai and Kia say millions of people should park outside. Plus, a pretty scary moment caught on camera in Mexico. What happened when a bear crashed a birthday party? Car makers Kia and Hyundai are issuing a big recall today over concerns that some cars can literally randomly burst into flames. Nearly 3.4 million cars are affected by this, and they're telling owners to park outside and away from anything flammable until they can get the car fixed. The issue? Something to do with a piece that can leak brake fluid and cause an electrical short. It is just the latest in a string of recalls for these companies. With a spike in theft, some joyrides allegedly caught on camera, a big problem for Kia and for Hyundai. They're both owned by the same parent company. Aaron Gilchrist has more.
It's the car theft wave sweeping the nation, and big cities are struggling to keep up. The numbers are shocking. In Chicago, for example, thieves stole only 500 Kias and Hyundais in the first half of 2022. But by the end of that year, that number had ballooned to more than 8,300. And this year is on track to be even worse, with car thefts already surpassing 21,000, up 86% year to date. The city says Kias and Hyundais make up more than half. And it's not just Chicago, of course. Cities like Cleveland, St. Louis, and Baltimore have seen a surge, too.
Kia boys, stolen car haul.
It all started in 2021 when a viral TikTok trend called #KiaBoys began spreading across social media. It instructed would-be car thieves on how to quickly hotwire certain Kia models that lacked engine immobilizers.
Pull it down and then break it down.
This doesn't work with most cars. In fact, 96% of other vehicles sold in the U.S. shipped with immobilizers in 2015. But they're not required, and only about a quarter of Kias and Hyundais had the protection. That's why last month, Chicago joined several other American cities in suing the automakers, alleging they've contributed to a major increase in crime. Kia has said the suits are without merit, while Hyundai has said all its cars meet government anti-theft requirements. In light of the disturbing streak, Kia and Hyundai attempted a fix, offering a free software update available at dealerships and at mass giveaway events. The update requires the car's key to be in the ignition to start, but there have been reports of cars being stolen even after they got the update. One victim's father telling our Washington affiliate,
I would love to find out if the program was actually put in or the program failed.
When asked for comment, Hyundai responded by saying, our dealers across the country are maximizing the number of anti-theft software installations. Kia told NBC Washington that it's confident the software update works as intended. The car makers built their reputations advertising affordable cars for the average consumer.
I'll be there in 30 minutes.
That allowed the pair, which are owned by the same South Korean conglomerate, to become the third largest manufacturer in the world at one point. But even though some security systems may work, thieves still target the cars, which could mean a smashed window and an abandoned car when realizing it can't be hacked for a joyride, underscoring just how big of a challenge Kia and Hyundai face.
Aaron Gilchrist is joining us now. So you mentioned those lawsuits from these different cities here. What do Kia and Hyundai say about that?
So you've got, we mentioned them, some of them, Chicago, Baltimore, New York City, and several other cities as well. And they've essentially said that in Chicago, for example, that there are deceptive practices that are underway with these two companies, that they are negligent and that they are creating a public nuisance by not having these safety features and giving thieves the opportunity to steal these cars. They want restitution for customers. They want people to be paid for whatever damages they've had to deal with. They want the car makers to put these safety devices, this anti-theft immobilizer, in the cars that are already out there. They were already doing it for new cars, but they want them in the old cars now, too. Hyundai and Kia have both said, you know what, we think that this is not a safety defect that you're talking about here. They've said the lawsuits don't have any merit in so many cases, and they have not violated any federal standards by not having these immobilizers in. Now, they've done these software updates to the tune of more than 500,000 cars in the last year or so. They've also given out the steering wheel locks to help people from that perspective. Again, hundreds of thousands of those, but obviously these cities are saying that's not enough.
Aaron Gilchrist, super interesting. Thank you very much for bringing us that story. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our teams around the world have done it for you. Here's some of what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. Out of Azerbaijan, officials there say they've arrested the former head of Nagorno-Karabakh's separatist government as he tried to cross into Armenia. The Border Guard Service says he was taken to the Azerbaijani capital, where, quote-unquote, relevant state bodies are going to decide what happens to him. Tens of thousands of other people have already fled that area since Azerbaijan's Blitz military operation against ethnic Armenians. Out of England, the British Museum, the third most visited art museum in the world, is asking people for help finding thousands of missing artifacts. Remember, the museum said it fired a staff member last month over stolen, missing, damaged items. Its director is also quitting in the scandal. Now, there's a hotline to help the museum find stuff like gold rings and other jewelry, some of it dating back to ancient Greece and Rome. Out of Mexico, watch this woman's mama bear instincts kick in, literally. So look at this. This is a family. They're celebrating like a birthday for a little boy. A bear jumps onto the picnic table. I think it's like enchiladas and tacos. I mean, inches from their faces. That is so scary. Look at that mother. So calm. She's shielding her son. She's just, I mean, that's incredible. That's an incredible, very scary moment. The bear just went away. It just wandered away, and amazingly, nobody was hurt. Coming up, a shocking story about how Qatari officials tried to find the mother of an abandoned baby at an airport. What happened next that now has 5 women suing when we come back. A senior Qatar Airways executive today saying an incident involving invasive gynecological exams of passengers, women on planes, will not happen again. That statement to the Australian government comes after Qatar Airways was denied a request to double its current number of flights to Australia. It wants to expand business, but Australia says no. That's after 13 Australian women say they were taken off a flight from Doha to Sydney at gunpoint by guards back in 2020, and that they were subjected to these invasive gynecological exams without consent. Qatari officials say they were trying to identify the mother of a newborn baby that had been found abandoned in a trash can at the airport in Doha. Qatar Airways senior vice president describing what happened as a, I'm quoting here, one-off, very extreme incident that he says will not be repeated. Matt Bradley is joining us now. Matt, it is just extraordinary with some of these details here. Qatar is looking to expand business in Australia. At the same time, they're being sued by 5 of these women here in Australian federal court. Walk us through this.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complicated story, and it spans, 3 years, as you described. This is a slow-motion scandal, and this happened all the way back in October of 2020 when 13 women were taken off of airplanes and made to essentially undergo some sort of gynecological exam. It sounded like in ambulances that were parked next door to these airplanes. So this was a rushed, frenzied, chaotic scene. If you can imagine, a lot of outrage and a lot of lingering anger from these 13 women, 5 of whom, as you mentioned, are now suing. Now, we need to mention, though, this parliamentary hearing in which all of these people are making these comments, including that vice president of Qatar Airways, that doesn't really have anything to do directly with this incident from 2020. This is a business story. This is about why Qatar's application to double its flights from Qatar to Australia was rejected. And there's a lot of moving parts here that don't involve this incident where the gynecological exams were used against these 13 women. There's also questions of whether or not Qantas, which is sort of the state airline, but it's actually a private airline, it doesn't get any state money or protection, actually intervened to stop Qatar Airways from doubling the number of flights that it services to this subcontinent, to Australia. So that's kind of the scandal here. It's a business story, and that's why there's this parliamentary hearing. And that's why we're hearing from these senior executives, because there's still so much anger about this incident. And it is one of the reasons we heard from the transport minister saying this was one of the reasons that I considered, or it was the context around this incident that caused me to stop the application and give no explanation to Qatar Airways. And that's what brings us here today. Hallie?
Big international news coming out of Australia and Qatar. Matt Bradley, thank you very much for that. That's it for us for this hour. We've got a lot more coverage coming up right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.